Thank you, the Strathmore Business School, for this opportunity to moderate this highly engaging session around the theme of strategizing for business reentry, redesigning the HR value chain. And today, as Waheto had said earlier, we are focusing on Pillar 3, strategic HR leadership, HR in the driver's seat. Basically, once we talk strategy, we have a great HR strategic plan. How do we roll it out in terms of policies, the right competencies for the HR practitioners? And in case the policies don't work out and you done everything to comply, you have avoided litigation, but in case it happens and you get yourself to the courts, what are some of the things to look out for? And we have a very able panel that is going to focus on the legal framework, navigating the new HR labor hurdles, specifically around HR compliance, but also around HR in terms of recontracting. And I'm going to introduce my panel, starting with Dr. Mr. Maema, I'm giving you a doctorate, honorary. He's Mr. William Maema, and William is a leading corporate commercial law expert spanning over 30 years experience, and he's currently a partner in charge of commercial employment and intellectual property and technology practice at IKM Advocates. He is a senior partner. His areas of expertise are commercial and corporate law, cross-border transactions, education, employment law, estate planning, immigration, information communication technology law, intellectual property law, as well as legislative drafting in terms of non-governmental organizations or not-for-profit. He holds a Master's of Law degree and a Bachelor's of Law degree, and he also has a diploma in law. William has done several publications around issues to do with employment and other areas that fall within his practice. And currently, he is a chairman of the Advocates Disciplinary Tribunal. Karibu sana, William. And our next panelist is Catherine Njonjo Kabure. Karibu, Catherine. And currently, she's the HR director of Uganda Breweries Limited. And Catherine has quite a lot of experience in the HR space in several sectors. But right now, she is in the wines and spirit industry, and she has experience in consulting, compensation policy, the implementation, as well as performance management. She's a certified executive coach with a strong passion for growing young people to be best versions of themselves. I love that. She has previously served as head of shared services with Diageo, as well as compensation and benefits manager at Bamburi Cement. Catherine holds an MBA as an executive coach with the Association of Executive Coaches, and she's a certified HR practitioner. Karibu sana, Catherine Jonjo Kabure. And the next panelist is Odhiambo Ooko. Odhiambo is a fellow of the Institute of IHRM and as an accredited employment and labor relations court mediator. She currently serves as a senior manager, employee and labor relations in Safaricom PLC. Odhiambo has served in several sectors, manufacturing, oil and gas, hospitality previously, and has served as an employee relations and wellness specialist in the airline and banking sectors. I emphasize that because in this season of COVID, we need many wellness specialists. He is currently serving as in the disciplinary council of Institute of Certified Investments and Financial Analyst, and previously he served as a governing council member with IHRM and participated during his tenure. He participated in the enactment of the HR Act. He holds a bachelor's and a master's degree and is an accredited labor court mediator. Karibu sana, Odhiambo. And we have Rose Maruti. Next, Rose has 23 years of both strategic and operational levels HR. We've been speaking about both during this conference. She has both perspectives, and her area of specialization includes strategy, policy formulation, reward, among others. She currently serves as a HR manager, operations and change for Unga Holdings Limited, supporting its three business lines, Unga Limited, Unga Farm Care, as well as the Ensbali Bakery. She holds a master's degree and a bachelor's degree. She is a full member of IHRM with an IHRM practicing certificate. And she's also a trustee and trust secretary for Unga Holdings, the staff pension, and a board committee member of the Finance and Partnerships Committee of Women on Boards Network. So that is my ABLE panel. And the way we are going to tackle this as we started planning, we are going to roll out HR compliance is quite wide, and we just wanted to get feelers from the participant. What is this that is in your heart that has been bothering us as practitioners on the ground in terms of compliance? So you can put it on the chat, but we will run a poll later. But just put just one line. It is implementation, onboarding, the onboarding experience, or it could be performance management. It could be, but within performance, is it the PIP? Is it the rewards? Is it setting targets? What has been bothering you around compliance of the policies and procedures, or even around the competencies that us HR practitioners need to have on the ground? And I'll be picking those issues up. But also, if you have a specific question, you can direct it on the chat, and I'll pick it up during the engagement session. But the way we are going to tackle this, I'm going to give each panelist at 8 to 10 minutes to share about a specific issue I'm going to probe them about. The first item we are going to start with is HR competencies. And within this sub-theme, what we were discussing about as a team, we were wondering, what are the key competencies the HR practitioners need to have to effectively handle or manage the legal framework? And I'll invite Odhiambo to take us through, and then Catherine Kabure will also make a presentation based on that. Karibu sana, Odhiambo. Oh, okay. I can't see him on the call, but he was there earlier. Let me give the chance to Catherine.
Thanks, Susan. Wow. So okay. So need to rejig because we were going to do a tag team with Odhiambo, and he was just going to set the ground in terms of the competencies. So I'll take it from where I was going to take it from, which is what I think the most important thing for HR is we tend to sort of sometimes be very focused on following the law and following legal precedents. And really, what our role has to become more strategic. We need to think about how do we de-risk the business, because legal precedences change every day. And I think William will take us through, what's happening in the legal space right now. So I think the most important thing for HR practitioners to think about is, how do I de-risk my business? How do I bring business sense into HR decisions? So then I'm seen as that strategic business partner that we're always wanting to be called. I was going to speak about relationships, and Odhiambo will come back and speak about, the competencies that help build these relationships. I came into HR from a finance background, and I can assure you it was like chalk and cheese coming into this space. And my first encounter with the union was, I came into a business that had just gone through a go slow. We had to bring in the national leadership to mediate between the business and the union. And what I quickly learned, though, is that the union is made up of people who are human beings just like you and I. They have the same fears, the same concerns, the same worries, the same thinking around our business needs to be successful in the next 10 years. And they just want their voice to be heard. So the first thing I'd say is have some empathy. The second thing I quickly learned as well, moving from finance, where you think the union is difficult animal to work with, is that union leadership actually spend a lot of time training their leaders in labor law, in changing trends in what's happening in trends in people management, trends in industrial relations, trends in so many things. So you
Mm,
have to up your game. You have to sort of be ahead of them. So that when you get into conversations, you're having conversations as peers, not that you're going into a meeting and they're looking at you like, goodness, does this person know what they're even talking about? So understand the law, but most importantly, also understand what's going on in terms of trends, in terms of what's changing in the labor world.
mm,
The third thing I learned was that you got as good as you gave. So if you're honest and straightforward, if you involve them in decision making, if you sort of take them through the journey of whatever change you want to make, they actually come with you. They give you what you give them. So if you obfuscate issues, if you hide behind something, or you bring a change suddenly to their radar, what happens is they fight you. But if
mm,
you walk with them along the journey and engage them, they sort of come to the party with you and help you transition the organization through that change. So what I'd say is keep the communication channels open. We do it by having every 6 weeks, myself and the production director have a meeting with the union leadership, just to touch base in terms of what's going on the ground, what do they need our support with, and what could we do differently to help them, with whatever issues their members are going through, and how they can participate in business decision making.
mm,
I, I do then want to summarize that by just talking about what happened when COVID came. So when we went into lockdown in Uganda, we went into lockdown in March. We didn't come out until October. We already had a pre-signed CBA. So 1 July,
mm,
which is when our financial year begins, we actually had already agreed a CBA, signed, dusted off, you know, they were going to get their 7% increase come 1 July. And we had to sort of say, because we're not going to give the rest of the business any salary increases in the in the new financial year, was how do we then get the union to accept that they're also not going to get a salary increase in a
mm,
year where they already had a signed CBA? So, and this is where understanding your paperwork is very important. So,
mm,
because we had to give them 1 month's notice before we could change any terms and conditions in the CBA, what we did is we started conversations mid-April and said, okay, we spoke with the local leadership, spoke with the national leadership, and said, we're not going to be able to do these July changes. I took them through what our P&L was looking at that point because of COVID, the impact of COVID, and then went into a renegotiation of the CBA. And I remember the National General Secretary telling me he's never gone backwards on a CBA negotiation in his life. This was his first time.
mm.
But that came because we had already built credibility, we had built the relationship, and we had also sort of told the leadership this is what the business was going through, and we'd like their support, coming along. So I think I'll leave it there and just say I think empathy is important. Understanding the law and being on top of your game in terms of trends. And the third thing is, of course, building that relationship, building your credibility as a business partner, and saying what you mean and not obfuscating issues. Yeah. Back to you, Dr. Susan.
Wow. Thank you, Catherine,
Yes.
for sharing from a personal perspective. Basically, what
Yeah.
you're telling us is have your staff, your technical competencies right. But in addition, you need some key behavioral competencies, which are empathy, communication skills, very critical for us as HR practitioners. And just let me pose one question. What about the leadership and managerial competencies? What has really come out key for us during this COVID season?
So I'll start actually with something that Qureshi put in the chat, self-care. You
Uh-huh.
cannot give what you don't have. I think you really need to take care of yourself. You need to be able to. There is something. I don't know if Hans is still on this call. There's something Hans took us through called being the corporate athlete, which is just about taking care of your whole self. But more importantly, is understanding that you are the mirror and the
Mhm,
soul of the organization. So what does that mean? It means that when the organization is under duress and under pressure, you're the one who needs to keep things together. So that means that you need to understand what's going on in the ground, which means that you have to have a high level of emotional intelligence. It
Mm-hmm.
means that you also need to understand what business pressure your business is going through. So that means that you must also understand your business strategy, you must understand your P&L, you must understand all the things that are going on in the business for you to be able to give any advice. And I think most importantly, you must own, and I like the previous conversation, you must own your seat on the table, which is you are the one to orchestrate whatever change is going on in that business. So you're a change leader, change manager. I like the Dave Ulrich's model around being a strategic business partner, but he also talks about being an employee advocate and being an administrative expert. So how do you bring all those things together in such a way that the business then trusts you to lead them through this change? There's nothing worse than an HR leader who doesn't know what to do in the times of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll summarize it that way. Susan, I hope I've
Wow.
answered the question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So, participants, let's keep the chat alive. Just if you have something, a question to pose, just post it there, and we'll pick it around after the panelists take their round. And specifically for Catherine, what are some of the competencies you could have been struggling with during this season of COVID, especially whether technical, around the navigating the legal hurdles, around the leadership and managerial competencies, or even behaviorals, the empathy, the EI, emotional intelligence. Now, we'd like to wear another hat and go to the policy manual that we take care of in the organization. And I'm inviting Rose to take us through this session. Karibu sana, Rose Maruti. Good. And Rose is going to take us through how do we put together the relevant policies and procedures, especially to align with what has been going
Thank
on the last 2 years. Karibu sana, Rose.
thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this opportunity for me to participate in the panel and to speak to the team. So looking at the legal framework and looking at the policies, and anchoring onto what Catherine has said, yes, it's very critical for us to understand as HR professionals, to understand the law and see how do we apply it back to the organizations that we are in. We are all in different industries and different dynamics apply in the different industries, but then how do we look at the different policies and how do we navigate with them to be able to make sense to the business? Some of the policies I have looked at during the COVID season and just thinking through and seeing what has been the impact on the business and how do we apply it going forward. I think the most critical item that has been impacted is the performance management aspect. We are now all working from home, so we are on virtual working. Then how do you ensure actually productivity is happening? So those are two policies where now you don't have people in the office, you're not seeing them every day, you're not able to monitor or basically look over their shoulder to see what are you doing. So there's the flexi, and then now in terms of productivity, are you actually being able to deliver, and how do we ensure that this is happening? So we are moving away from the traditional performance management, the traditional appraisals, and shifting into either project-based performance or target-based performance. And so that means then you have to shift how you're looking at performance, shift how you're measuring performance in an organization. So that then speaks to your performance policy. And performance is actually tied into the bigger cycle of talent management. Yeah. So how are you going to handle your talent going forward as they are working virtually? We from the earlier sessions, we've had that. Then we are ending up with employees who do not want to work with you 8 to 5 full time. They want to do a project or a certain assignment and work for other 2 or 3 organizations. How do you structure your policies then to be able to accommodate that kind of employment arrangement? Then, of course, then that would speak to remuneration. Yeah, we are no longer we are quickly shifting from the normal monthly salary that comes at the end of the month. We are moving to project-based pay. We are moving to piece-rated pay, where you deliver on an assignment and you're paid for that piece. And of course, then it's also shifting things like the benefits we are going to offer employees. No longer traditional benefits, the normal, pension and medical and such easy stuff, because then our employees also are different and they are demanding for different things. Our new generation Y, Z, they're not interested in stories of pension. So what benefits can we develop as HR professionals that then would be able to attract them and to keep them as our employees, whether as piece-rated employees or full-time employees. So that means you have to look at your whole policy around reward, around performance, and then we are talking about working. So that's flexi working. All right, a big piece also that has come in is the aspect of safety, health, and environment, talking on specifically on employee wellness. I think we have spoken almost every presenter we have had in this conference has talked about employee wellness. Yeah, how do we support our employees to make sure that their wellness is in check and they are supported whenever there's need. So I won't belabor on that, but that's a critical aspect that we have now in the organization and have to incorporate it in our policies. During the COVID season, then we have come up a lot with the issue of redundancies, people moving jobs, people losing jobs. How then, as an organization, do you anchor your redundancy policy to the law? I think this is the season where the industrial court has zoomed in to see how our organizations letting employees go. And are we following the law to the letter, making sure employees have the benefits, are paid what is due to them, or are we just releasing them because the business is not doing well or has just hit a snag for about 3 months and we decide we are making everyone redundant? So that's also a critical piece. Yeah, the other day, someone called me to ask me, how do we handle this? It's an outsourced labor organization, inherited employees from the organization into an outsourced arrangement, but at the time of inheriting, that process was not handled well. Now the business has gone down, and so the contract for outsourced has been terminated. So these employees are basically totally out of work. They have sued, and they have co-sued both the outsourced service provider and the employer for dues that were due before they were outsourced labor employees. So as an organization, that will come back to bite you if you don't handle it well. Yeah. Then coming up with virtual and flexi working, we now have many organizations are having global employees. You have people seated in a different country and they're working for a different organization. So from an HR perspective, what does that mean to you in terms of employment law? When you engage these people in a different country, what law are you going to apply in their contracts? Yeah, we have to be very clear. Is it the Kenyan law? Is it the Ugandan law? Is it the law in the States? So that will have an implication on you as you start taking in global employees. So it's critical for us. Then it means as HR practitioners, we then need to widen our net in terms of understanding the different laws that apply in the different countries and how will it impact on us when we engage people from those different countries to come and work or on a project or to work on a full-time or part-time basis for our organizations. And then, of course, there's the issue of shift in terms of working. I think that also ties to the remuneration policy and also our employee value proposition, because COVID has really poked holes in the employee value proposition as organizations. What are we doing then to make sure that our EVP remains valid, our EVP remains relevant to our employees, and then ensure that we are still attractive employers to these employees or even other potential employees. And lastly, I think there's the aspect of talent management. Now we are having multi-skilled employees in the organization. So how do we make sure that we are keeping them? So retention, and then also to make sure that we are still enhancing their skills so that they don't get, especially our younger generation, they don't get bored and they want to leave very fast. So we are multi-skilling them and re-engaging them in projects that keep them engaged and want to stay on with us. I think that those are some of the policies that have been affected during this COVID season.
Wow. Thanks, Rose. I have one more to put in about confidentiality. Working from home, people
Oh,
are walking around you, checking on the screen what you're
yeah.
doing. How do you manage that as part of the policies and compliance?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that's a good question. So right now with technology, of course, this has widened the amount of data that we all have access to working from home. So then we have to make sure that our employees understand the confidentiality concept. So making sure that whatever you're working on, how do you make sure that it is safe? You know, in the house, if you're not working on your laptop, you know, you have kids who would want to come and press on a document, or, you know, sometimes they're just playing with the keyboards, not realizing that they're sending out a document. So how do you make sure simple things as locking your computer so that, or your laptop, so that the kids are not able to send out documents? Right now, many organizations lock their laptops in terms of making sure you cannot use like the external memory stick, or you're not able to email documents out to your personal email and such stuff. But also there's the aspect of sensitization on your employees. So you have to develop new policies around confidentiality. Employees need to sign a confidentiality agreement committing that whatever data they have shall be kept confidential and it will not be shared out of the organization. And then there's also the aspect of how the documents move within the organization. Right now, there's a lot of electronic signing. How do we make sure our ICT policies then secure all the documentations in the system, and we have like the shared folders where documents are actually able to be dropped onto the server and they do not stay onto on the laptop. Yeah. So such policies need to be put in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Rose. And participants, just put your questions on the chat if you'd like us to speak about a specific policy that you would like to just understand how it can be implemented in this season. Welcome back, Odhiambo Oko. It's good to see you back. Technology sometimes fails us, even if you work in a technology company.
No, my lights went off. I don't have
Oh, the
lights,
lights.
so
It's
yes,
another organization that let you down. All right.
yes, yes.
Good. So I'll give you a chance before William comes in. And basically in your session with Catherine, you are focusing on HR competencies required of us as HR practitioners to just make sure that we are able to manage the compliance during this season.
So thank you very much. I'm sorry about the light. It's a different organization, but this is an acceptable. So I hope the apologies have been taken. Before I speak about HR competencies, I like speaking about purpose. So if you know your purpose as a HR practitioner, then your work is 50% done. So let's speak about purpose. I want to submit 3 purposes. 3. Number 1, your purpose as a HR person is to create and maintain people practices which develop and maintain a harmonious work environment that supports the attainment of individual objectives. The individual has to achieve certain objectives and corporate objectives. So the number 1 thing you have to do as your purpose as a HR person is to create and maintain people practices which develop and maintain a harmonious work environment that supports, number 1, individual objectives that you have come to achieve in Safaricom, in Strathmore, in any organization, and then support organization objectives. Then number 2, you have to ensure that people practices are fair, transparent, and compliant with policies and the law. Number 2, purpose. Number 3, then you must design and deliver solutions to the business so that the business at large then becomes successful. So you start from a point of purpose before you come and think of the things you're going to do. So the changes have been spoken about by my colleague Rose. I'd just like to pick some of them and tell you how to comply. Working from home and remote working has caused a few problems. So working from home, you're assuming I'm working from my house in Syokimau. Actually, somebody has gone to Europe and they're working from somewhere in London. What if they fall sick in London? Does your medical scheme apply? There's an organization that found that people are working outside the country, and they said working from home means working within country, so that you do not work anywhere else except within that country, because that caused a big problem. Because working from home means you can work anywhere, and if you work in Europe and you fall sick there and you're in an accident, does your GPA apply? Does your IBA apply? Does your policies apply? So that's a big problem. The second thing that has happened working from home then, workers have realized we can be independent and not need a supervisor. I've worked from home since March last year. Do I need a supervisor? I'm self-motivating. So that calls for different skills from the leaders, different skills from the managers, different skills from everybody else. I'm self-supporting. And then it speaks also to your benefits. You had given me a table tennis table, a coffee station, a creche. I don't need them anymore. I'm working from home. So you have to rethink your benefits. Because I'm working from home, independent. Now, what that has brought about is what we call work-life integration. Because your life now has been integrated with your work. So as HR managers, we have to think differently. Rosa has spoken slightly about gig economy. Gig economy simply means that this person does not want to work with you for many hours. He wants to work for 3 hours in Strathmore, 2 hours in UON, 1 hour at home, another hour somewhere else. So how are you going to make sure that you comply with this kind of a worker? Because you want to tap in their knowledge, but they don't want to be tied down to you. So what are you going to do in terms of policies? Then let's speak about the laws slightly. There are new laws coming in. The new kid on the block, there are 2. The Pre-Adoptive Act, Pre-Adoption thing in the Employment Act, and the Data Protection Act. How do you protect your data? And you know what has happened with the Data Protection Act? The data owner, the person, is king. He can tell you, bring me back my CV. What are you doing with my data? They can withdraw that data consent. So in terms of compliance then, the HR practitioner has to be on top of their game. With the new laws coming in, the practitioner has to know how to handle those particular laws and change their policies accordingly. So my question is, do you have a data protection policy in place? Do you have a pre-adoptive leave in place? Do you know the new laws that are coming to be in place? So that is in terms of compliance. Let's speak about the issue of mental health and mental wellness and mental illness. People working from home. Some of them don't have very big rooms like the way I'm sitting in a room here. They have small houses. Their wife has been laid off. The husband has been laid off. The children are at home. What are you doing about mental health for your colleagues? Leave alone mental health. They're working from home. They are sitting on a dining table, on a dining chair. That dining chair is going to destroy their back. What are you doing about their health of the employee in totality? The other thing that is coming up is that the issue of leadership. There has to be a change in leadership. Your shift in leadership has to change. So that when you're a leader, then you know these people have changed. The employee of today has changed so much that the leader has to change. The leader has to change in the way they're managing the employee because the employee has changed so much. Now, to help you maneuver some of these changes, new changes are happening in the world. I want to propose to you 3 books. I love reading. The first book that you'll read that will assist you is how to create trust with the person that is working from home or working remotely. So that you trust that person is working, and that person will trust that you have their best interests at heart also, as you're also working from home. Number 1 book I'm recommending, The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. Number 2, I'm recommending that you read The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. Join me in doing 20-20-20 every day. 20 minutes for your own well-being, 20 minutes for reading something uplifting, and 20 minutes for meditation. 20 minutes exercise, 20 minutes reading, 20 minutes meditation. Then we need more servant leaders. So please read this book, Servant Leadership in Action by John C. Maxwell. So I've recommended 3 books that will assist you to maneuver this current changing environment. And of course, compliance with the law, it goes without saying. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Odhiambo, for that and the resources you have shared. I love that. I've taken notes as well. And something we've just been discussing when Catherine was sharing is the way the competency framework of the organization is designed around technical, leadership, and managerial and behavioral competencies. And now you brought very key issues around the leadership competency of the HR practitioner, where the employee says, I am self-propelled, I'm my own manager, I'm my own leader. So I just like to pose a question. How do I up my game in terms of demonstrating a leadership competency to my team and our employees, where they are saying that I am self-managed, I'm self-propelled, I don't need a leader? How can I up my game?
You must realize that today's worker has a lot of knowledge. Mm-hmm. The day when the boss knew everything is gone. So you must also be humble yourself to learn from those kind of people. Mm. You learn from them, you relearn, and then you learn again, and then you unlearn. Because the worker of today, the person reporting to does not mean you are more clever. And we always say this: employ people who are better than you, and so that it becomes easier to supervise. So if you do your recruitment correctly, and you have people who have necessary skills, then you don't need to supervise them. Mm. You only need to give the mission. This is the mission, and this is the intention. And when they have the intention of the mission, they'll run with it. So your intention has to be very clear. So the mission is to do A, B, C, D, and to get to point Z. And this is the intention. Leave the how to them, they will do it. That is how you supervise today's employees. The mission has to be clear, the intent has to be clear.
Wow. Thank you. I'm being asked that to retype the questions on the chat, the books, so that we can just follow that.
Let me just say it slowly. The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. Mm-hmm. The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. Mm-hmm. Servant Leadership in Action by John C. Maxwell. Mm-hmm. You got it?
Yes, I got it for myself. I hope the participants have also written them.
Let me type it as you're talking then.
All right. Thank you very much, Odhiambo. We'll come back to you later on with the participants' questions and see what's coming out of the chat. And thank you, participants. Taking note of the questions, and we'll pose them after William makes a presentation. Karibu, William. William is has encountered many issues in the courts, but there are some that are close to his heart. And things especially we can avoid as HR practitioners. What is it that, William, we can do so that we don't get ourselves to the courts? But in case we get ourselves there, post-litigation, in that litigation aspect, what are the things we need to do or what goes wrong? Karibu sana, William.
Thank you, Susan. I assume everyone can hear me. And Susan, you are my sounding board. Can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Very clearly, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important webinar. And before I forget, I want to thank you graciously for the doctorate degree. So please send over the certificate. Susan has given an indication of what I'm going to talk about, but I really want to be a free spirit in this and talk about what is in my heart, informed by what I encounter from my clients. Being an employment law practitioner, I meet HR managers almost on a daily basis. I interact with them almost on a daily basis. I interact with business leaders, and I know what really their pain points are. I know what aches them, what keeps them awake at night. And those are the points that I really wanted to talk to you about, not necessarily what happens in the courts, because by the time you go to court, for most of us, it's already too late. There is very little to salvage. So we should focus more on how we can actually avoid going there. And as HR practitioners and business leaders, I think you would agree, decisions relating to people in the workplace are probably the most difficult decisions that you'll ever have to make. These are decisions which talk to the most respected CEO in this country or anywhere else, and they'll tell you one of the most difficult decisions they have to make is separation or something to do with the staff. Because we are all human beings, and there is that place in our heart that tells us that we must treat the next person fairly. But they could have done things that you find difficult to deal with, and you have to make a decision. And when they're grappling with this decision, I always remind them that they are paid a lot of money actually for that very purpose, to make those very hard decisions. Those decisions have to be made. They have to be informed and reasonable decisions based on the right advice and the right information, so that they don't come back to bite you. So in the context of COVID-19, the period that we have lived in the last 2 or so years, what are those pain points that have been keeping my clients awake? And I just want, in the next 10 minutes or so, to run through some of them and, as it were, just give you an indication, a roadmap, like what the answer to that particular issue is. The list could be very long, but I've summarized that into about 10 issues that I want to provide direction on. Relating to COVID-19, and my colleagues have talked about this, some of the things that we really didn't know or consider very seriously before the pandemic were issues like unpaid leave, issues like pay cuts, working from home, and Odhiambo has done a very good job on that. The issue of flexi time, is it 8 to 5 still? And I should say many of these things no one ever thought about, but when the pandemic came, they became a reality. The long and short of this is that these are things that employers were not prepared for, and they had to put together thoughts and ideas of how to deal with them. The bottom line is this: the Employment Act is very clear. You cannot amend or change the terms of employment without consultation with the employee. And that presupposes that once you consult, you are going to agree on the changes, and those changes are going to be documented. It is an express mandatory requirement to document all changes that are agreed. So when you have to send an employee on unpaid leave, you have to cut their pay, you have to talk about working from home and flexi time. All these were unanticipated, and they require consultation, and you have to put them in writing. Now, the challenge that came was, what happens if an employee does not agree, especially to the pay cuts, to unpaid leave, and things of that kind? The suggestion or the solution to that issue is this. In law, there is a doctrine called frustration. And frustration is where factors outside your control and factors that were not anticipated prior to entering into the contract have now come into play, and they have made it impossible for you to perform the contract as previously envisaged. So if you're saying that you agreed on this salary with an employee on the understanding that the business would continue operating normally, and then this bomb has fallen here and you are unable to operate, and you therefore can no longer afford the agreed salary and all these other factors, then it is possible that you can take refuge in the doctrine of frustration and say, even if you don't agree, you have to take a pay cut, or if you don't agree to the pay cut, we've got to go to termination, and the termination will be based on the doctrine of frustration. So this doctrine had not been tested before in respect of employment contracts before the pandemic. It is very common in commercial contracts, but now cases have gone to court. And what the courts have said is that they do recognize that frustration can be a reason a very valid reason for terminating an employment contract. However, the employer must demonstrate how the event they are talking about frustrated them to the point that they were unable to perform their contract, their part of the contract. In other words, if you are talking about COVID-19, it is not enough just to say COVID came, and because of that, I fired everybody. You have to show how it forced you to be unable to to deliver on your contract. And because I don't have much time, let me just run down the other issues. So, termination basics. This is, again, a very big issue for employers. And there are only two things I should remind you of: reasons and process. That is the Kenyan law since 2007. You can no longer tell your employee you are fired. You can do that in America and in other jurisdictions, but not in Kenya. Employment at will, termination at will was abolished in 2007 when you got the new labor laws. Now, as an employer, you have to have reasons for termination and you have to follow the due process, which means there has to be a hearing and sufficient opportunity provided to the employee. Redundancy. Of course, with the pandemic, a lot of jobs have been abolished and many people have lost their jobs. So how do you conduct a redundancy? I'm not going to take you through the process because that's a discussion for another day. But again, 2 points for you to bear in mind. The statute as currently drafted, if you read section 40, it is extremely confusing. It is very inelegant in how it is drafted. And therefore, what has happened is that many employers have got the process wrong, and the courts have had to interpret and provide guidance on what the proper process is. So it is very important that you actually get legal guidance on how that section has been interpreted by the Employment and Labor Relations Court, as well as the Court of Appeal, because for the longest time, the position that was being adopted by the Employment and Labor Relations Court was overturned by the Court of Appeal. So if you do not know what has happened and what the current position is, it means that by mere reading of the statute and applying it is going to land you in a ditch. There's also the issue of severance pay and service pay, and this confuses very many employers. Clarity is this: severance is only payable upon a redundancy, and it is computed at the rate of a minimum of 15 days for every completed year of service. Not those words of the statute, at least. What employees have done, they have read the law very carefully, and they have said that the use of at least means that that is not all that they should be paid. And so it is not unreasonable for them to come back to you when you are proposing to pay them severance based on 15 days to tell you that you should consider paying something more. And what the courts have said is that if indeed they can, if indeed you can afford to pay them more, you should be able to consider that proposal. What about service pay? Service pay is provided for in the law, but I would call it a dead letter law, except in one respect. It is dead letter in the sense that it says an employee whose employment has been terminated is entitled to service pay, provided they are not members of a registered pension or provident fund, there is no gratuity payable, and they are not members of the National Security Fund, that is NSSF. Of course, we know that NSSF is mandatory, and most employers have pension schemes. So it is very unlikely that you'd find an employee who is not falling in any of these exceptions. But the courts have had occasion to interpret this because some employees have said, I need to be paid service pay because my employer was not paying National Social Security Fund for me. And if they can prove that actually the employer does not have a provident fund, they don't have a pension scheme, and they were not remitting, even if they were deducting, they were not remitting NSSF, then the employer will be ordered to pay service pay or to make service pay at the rate of 15 days pay for every completed year of service. That is the current position. Data protection, my colleagues have talked about it. I just want to say one thing, that from 2019, we have a new law, Data Protection Act. even without employment or anything else, anybody who is handling personal data is required to comply with that law. But the obligation is even higher on employers because they are actually data processors and they are data controllers under that act. So the information that you used to get from your employees as a matter of course, and in fact, you are allowed to get personal information from your employees. That information must be treated in a very different way, effective November 25th, 2019. How do you mitigate the risk? To mitigate the risk, you need to comply strictly. Number one, of course, you have to understand the basics of the data protection law. And I think it is a matter of prudence for any business to ensure that they are taken through a formal training on the requirements of the Data Protection Act. You cannot comply with this act unless you understand what it means. Secondly, you need to come up with policies that address data protection issues. And number three, you need to amend your contracts to have a specific clause on data protection. One of the issues that we are grappling with very frequently nowadays is where you're conducting an investigation. This employee has been doing shady business, working for others, doing stuff. What right do you have getting into their email account, extracting that information, and using it in the disciplinary process? If you do not have a specific provision in the contract or in your HR policies giving you the right to do so, you could land in very serious trouble, even when the employee has done despicable things. Transfer of employees is a real issue in relation to COVID, where businesses are closing, employees, there is restructuring happening, employees being employed by other entities within the group, or even takeovers and mergers. Many countries have laws, specific laws that protect employees in the event of a transfer. The UK has one, Uganda has a similar law, and many other countries. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we don't have this. So how do you deal with it? It is a real issue. You have to consult with the employees and bring them on board. As one of my colleagues said, I think it is Rose, that you bring them on board, get them to understand, let them work with you so that they can understand what the transaction is about. What about legitimate expectation? What we are having is fixed term contracts. Many employers are moving towards fixed term contracts. And you have this employee who works on a fixed term contract 1 year for 10 years. And all of a sudden, the contract expires. And as they're waiting for renewal, as usual, they are told to go home. It's not been renewed. That is a very big issue. And the courts have said very clearly that in those situations, the employee has a legitimate expectation that the contract will be renewed. Unless, and what before I go to unless, what leads to this conclusion? The language of the contract itself. I'm sure if you look at most of your fixed term contracts will be saying it's for 1 year, renewable by mutual agreement, or if it is not renewed, something like that. When you start talking about renewal in a contract, you're already creating an expectation. Previous renewals and the precedent that you have set also creates that precedent. And then promises that you make to employees and your conduct towards them. What is the remedy here? The remedy is to negate this expectation by notifying the employee if you do not intend to renew the contract. So if you have previously been renewing, but this time round you're not going to renew, please notify the employee in good time so that they can look for alternative employment. Susan, I'm about to finish. Housing allowance, one issue. Housing allowance is a statutory benefit and it is mandatory. So you have to either provide housing or pay the employee an amount that will enable them to get reasonable accommodation. What we have seen and where the biggest problem is where the contract does not address that issue at all. You talk of your salary shall be X and you don't mention housing allowance. This matter has gone to court many times and the courts have said, if your contract does not mention housing allowance, the presumption is that you did not intend for the gross pay or the basic pay that you have indicated in the contract to include housing allowance. You might think it's a small issue until you consider a company that has, say, 300 employees, some of whom have worked for 30 years. and say there is a redundancy or VER or whatever process that is happening, and about 100 of them, you're letting them go. And they all come back with this claim. They say, our contracts say nothing about housing allowance. So if it is 15% of their current pay, backdated to when they started working, times the number of employees that you are laying off, you can start doing the math to see what the implication of that is. Constructive dismissal, you never see it anywhere in our law, but it is a doctrine that is well entrenched now in Kenyan law, in the jurisprudence coming out of the courts. An employee can resign and still file a claim for unfair termination if they are able to prove that their resignation was caused by the employer's oppressive behavior. You made the working environment intolerable for them, and they had no choice but to resign. And the cases are very consistent on that point. Lastly, for you HR managers, what is the position of your HR policies in relation to the employment contract? Many of us forget to insert that nexus between the employment contract and the HR manual. The employment contract is the basic document that defines the terms of employment. The HR policies could be for political and PR purposes. They may have no legal effect whatsoever if you do not incorporate them into the employment contract. You need a provision in the employment contract stating that the policies, the terms contained in the HR policies have the same force as the terms in the employment contract, meaning that breach of those policies would lead to the same consequences as breach of the employment contract. And what happens if there's a conflict between the two documents? Again, the documents that we regularly look at don't say anything about it. You need to be clear that the terms of the employment contract normally would prevail if there's a conflict. For example, if the employment contract says annual leave is 25 days and the HR policies say it is 21 days, what is the position? Of course, the court would want to give the employee the more favorable interpretation of any document that is prepared by the employer. But it is important that you ensure that there is that nexus and you connect the two documents. So given the time available, those are the issues that are keeping my clients awake and keeping me busy. Thank you. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much, William, and I acknowledge participants' comments on the chat, and I will be directing them to the panelists. I want to just ask the participants, even as I take your questions and we get to the concluding part, has been your biggest pain point? And I'll ask Agnes to help me in just putting that poll up. What has been your biggest pain point during this season of the pandemic? So what are the key challenges? But let me just summarize it. Your biggest pain point. So go to slido.com and then indicate that passcode 602967. We just want to hear what has been your biggest pain point regarding HR and labor law compliance. So I'll take the question. Yes.
Susan, as you do that, let me drive one point home that all of us then can be able to understand this point.
Yeah.
The issue of service pay, the way it has been described. So I want you to look at yourself as a person employing a house manager at home. Do you pay an SSF? Does that person have a pension? And then you're going to pay service pay. I want you to look at your home in the rural area, your farm manager. You're a person who looks after the cattle of your home. Then if you do not comply with that law, NSSF and the pension and everything else, then you're going to pay service pay. Sometimes it's good to drive these points home with what you usually do as practitioners and even do at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Odhiambo, because I've learned that ignorance is never a defense, that I didn't know. You should have known. So let me pass the first question to Rose. Pamela says, Rose has mentioned the aspect of how employees are disengaged. Can this be expounded on? Of late, companies are losing huge sums of money in terms of court compensation due to wrongful dismissal. and we've just learned that from William. But Rose, just tell us, how do we now address that issue of a disengaged employee in relation to they're disengaged, probably they're not performing, and they're working from home, you can't connect with them, and then now it ends up being a litigation issue. How can we be proactively address it?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Susan. I think this is an aspect of wellness, if I understand the question well. And it's a matter of how do you then have the pulse of your employees in as much as they are working from home. We need to find ways of connecting with them or engaging with them to know that they are well. I know one thing that we started in my organization, though at some point we dropped it, is check-ins, where we divided people into groups. And so within that group, then there's one person who is driving, making sure that they call each and every person in that group just to check how are they progressing well? Are there any challenges? Is there any support that is required? So that we cascaded down into the function so that then we were able, being that we are a big organization and many employees, we're able to get the pulse through those who are doing the contact. But also I believe from an HR point of view, it's important as leaders to engage. We heard yesterday from some of the leaders who spoke to us that it's important to connect with the employees. Not that because you have given them tools and they are communicating or they are sending emails and they're getting work done, we assume that they are okay. But can we connect with them on a human perspective? Just giving them a call and checking, are they okay? Is the family okay? You know, and just looking at how then also do we demarcate use of time, you know, when is the office time, when can I be demanding for certain work, and when do I know this time, this is family time for this person, and I can't be calling and poking them for wanting certain reports or certain work to be done. So providing that, and then also there's the aspect of providing opportunities for wellness where they can call in or get counselors and coaches who can speak to them. It could be anonymous. You, as HR, provide the avenue, but it doesn't mean that you want to know each and everything they're talking about. No, provide the facility where they can get the support they need. And thirdly, providing opportunities for engagement. Yeah, from a virtual working point of view, it has been difficult to get people into some of the engagement activities, or they connect, you're not very sure if they are participating. So that's an aspect where HR, we are continuously thinking, how do we make sure our employees are engaged? How do they connect? You know, when COVID started, I remember we were offline for almost a month and a half in my organization. And the day we said we are having first time, let's try a virtual meeting, all of us, and see, does it work? And you could feel the vibe coming through the screen because everybody was excited to see their colleagues. We had truly missed each other. And that for me, that's the point where I was actually able to say, honestly, we spend so much time together in the office that we've become family. So people were truly missing each other, and just seeing somebody on the screen, you could feel people coming through the screen wanting to hug each other. So how do we provide those opportunities so that people are also able to connect with their quote unquote second family, which is the office, and they don't feel like they have been suddenly cut off from their life, from their family, and they're expected to continue to move on and operate at the same level. So it's a mixed bag of different things that you can do to be able to just make sure that engagement is going on. If performance is going down, I believe not running to put people on a PIP, but really connecting with them, discussing with them to see where is the challenge, what challenge are you getting, or is it something that you're lacking that you need support? You know, after providing that support and there's no turnaround is when you can start talking of PIP. So I think I believe in that, providing the opportunity and understanding what is causing this challenge, especially if somebody was a good performer and then suddenly they are going down and you're wondering what's happening. I think sometimes as HR, because we want to meet the demands of the business, we quickly run to put people on PIP. And you know, employees, once they land on PIP, they know I'm going to be fired in 3 months. So even their motivation to try and improve is killed. So how do we then just try to balance that from HR to make sure we are supporting the business, but also we are enabling and supporting the employees to be able to improve in terms of performance?
Wow. Yeah, thank you very much, Rose. I see empathy, one of the competencies Catherine shared about. And I want to pose this to Catherine, a question that came from Judy Eleva, especially around how do we support the HODs to face up to their role? Because you don't want employees coming up when now it's a PIP issue, yet the supervisors didn't do their part. How can we support our employees as supervisors to just improve that level of engagement in their teams?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think maybe first of all, building on what Rose has said, that the connections, and whether it's you're having weekly or whatever connections with the team and one-on-one sessions, and always asking your team to go on camera when you're talking to them. But I want to say something else. I do want to say that sometimes in all this, we forget that it is also the employee's responsibility to understand the policies, to understand what the expectations are from them. So this really is a 50-50 sort of relationship. So the first thing then we would say to our leaders is, are people clear about what's expected from them? Have you had have you broken it down into edible chunks? And also, are you alive to what challenges the person is working with? So Yambo talked about someone who's working in an SQ. That's where they live and that's where they're working. And you have certain expectations of them. So explain, ensure your leaders have explained the expectations, ask for proof that those expectations have been communicated and that they've been documented. And then taking it from there is when they tell you they're having the check-ins, the whole creation of empathy, the whole creation of we're a team where, I'm supportive, ask for proof for that as well. Are there calendar invites? Is there evidence that those conversations are actually going on? And then for yourself as an HR person, you do need to check in with your teams. Find out whether the information has been cascaded, the sessions are happening, and if your teams are experiencing these things the same way your leaders are telling you they're cascading them. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Can I add something?
Yes, so Diambo?
You're speaking about supporting HODs. I would speak about supporting leaders in the organization. So the HOD, first of all, should realize that they are a HR manager because they are managing people. So the HOD, first of all, they should make clear to them that they're the HR manager. And then you should look at their toolkit, their capabilities. So that they will keep adding something in their toolkit as they are growing to the HOD position. So we are talking about a line management toolkit. So that as a HR manager, you look at their toolkit and keep adding those skills and the tools that they need to manage people. First of all, start from managing self, then managing others, then managing leaders. So that you, as a HR person, you keep upskilling your line managers to do a proper job. And should put to them clearly, a HOD, a line manager is a HR manager. They manage people.
Thank you, Diambo, and for that. And participants, we note your key challenges. We may not be able to address them now, but as part of our continuous engagement in the summit, we'll see where we can put them. Now, the last question to William. There's a question here. How do you go about transfer of employees with running contracts in the case of a split in the organization during this COVID?
In the context of?
In the absence of law to guide on transfer.
Oh, excellent. So there are two, okay, let me put it very simply. There are two schools of thought as far as this issue is concerned. If the transfer is happening because the business has closed down, then technically there's a redundancy. And that is how it ought to be dealt with. However, the other school of thought is this. If as a result of what has happened, the jobs have been lost, but there's some restructuring or some opportunity for you to get these employees to be employed by another entity, which means that technically they don't lose employment. There's no loss of employment. That second school of thought says that in that case, there's no redundancy. And what needs to happen is that you need to negotiate with the employees, discuss with them, explain to them what the whole situation and tell them, although we will no longer be your employer, we are getting someone else to employ you on substantially similar terms. And that new employer is going to recognize your past years of service with us so that in the event of you being declared redundant in future, the computation will go back from the time that you started working with us. And that becomes part of the terms of the transaction that are being negotiated between the two entities, that the new employer agrees to take over the employees and recognize their past years of service, and the contracts that they are issued with are no less favorable than the ones that they were enjoying. If you structure it in that way, then there is actually no redundancy, and most of the employees in our experience have agreed to move on to the new employer.
I want to give
just one caveat. If an employee refuses to take on employment with a new employer, since we don't have a law requiring them to transfer, that employee becomes redundant and they have to be paid.
Wow, thanks, William.
I want to give live examples from my experience.
Yes, you can give us a live example as you give us your parting shot. Our time has really ran out.
I have been involved in transfer of employment in 2 cases. The first case is when we are moving HIK, Hilton International Kenya, to Hilton Nairobi. So when you negotiate with the employees, you actually give them a letter that gives them 2 options. The redundancy option is there clearly in the letter with the benefits they'll get and the calculation, or they transfer to the new organization with their benefits being recognized going backwards up to when they joined. And then this has also happened with BBK and ABSA. Okay, so these are live examples of transfer of employment. Okay, that has happened in this country. So that means my batting shot.
Yes, panelists, now we've come to the end. We may not have exhausted the issues, but what we are going to do, because the business school always has these forums where we have different sessions, we will pick some of the issues and see what our leaders in the business school can do about just taking them to the next level in terms of unpacking them further, including probably workshops where we learn how to redesign those contracts in this season. So I'll welcome the panelists to just give their parting shot in a few seconds as we come to the close. And thank you very much for your time. Yes, let me start with Odhiambo, then I'll go to Rose, Catherine, and William.
My parting shot to the practitioner who's on this call, who has been here for 3 days. You need to take care of yourself for you to be able to work properly. So take care of yourself physically, take care of yourself emotionally, take care of yourself spiritually, take care of yourself financially. Get a mentor, get a coach, get a peer to enable you to do your job properly. Please read at least 1 book in a month. Read 12 books in a year to improve you. Reading is where you get things. Read something in a month. The challenge is to read 52 books in a year, which I've not managed to do, but at least I read 1 book in a year. Read 1 book in a year to improve you. Strengthen your 4 C's. Connect with yourself when you wake up in the morning. Do 20 minutes exercise, 20 minutes reading, 20 minutes spirituality. Connect with others. Connect with your community and create your own joy and satisfaction. Lastly, get a very good dose of vitamin G. Have a heart of gratitude. Thank you. That's my parting shot.
Thank you, Odhiambo. I can see the passion in that. I had picked Rose or Catherine to go next. Rose?
Okay. So Odhiambo has closed it at a very high note. I wish he was the last person, yeah, because now you've scattered our closing remarks, if I could say. My closing remarks, I think, is in terms of, as organizations and as HR leaders, we need to think of what are the things that are going to impact on our employment law in Kenya, and how can we lobby through maybe organizations like Kenya Association of Employers to make sure that the amendments in the Employment Act are actually a reflection of what is happening in the organizations. So things like the concept of overtime with flexi working and virtual working, does it still exist in some industries? What is the impact and how can we lobby for that to be amended? Looking at the prescribed working hours, I think the employment law talks about 45 hours per week. Is that still relevant? And how can we renegotiate that in our employment law? Because we know people are working almost up to 60 hours, yeah? And it ties also to the concept of overtime. Looking at performance management, again, I think there's an opportunity for impacting on the law changes there. And then also looking at the documentation, you know, right now, a lot of things are being done virtually. When we go to industrial court, are those things valid? Can we use them as evidence that we can support? How do we negotiate with the law to make sure that those things are incorporated and employers are protected? So we are looking at things like documents that are signed on online, letters, contracts that are sent virtually, potential employee signs virtually and emails it back. Are those actually legal documents, or are we assuming that they are legal documents? So how do we then negotiate and impact the law that way? So I would pick it from that angle. In terms of how, as leaders in HR, are we going to look at our processes, our policies, and how do we then negotiate with the law to make sure that it's incorporated in our employment law? Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Catherine?
Yes, so I'm going to build on Rose because I think Odhiambo killed the vitamin G. So I'll build on what Rose has said, and it's purely from a compliance perspective. There are 4 things I'd like us to think about. The first one is around the Data Protection Act, Protection and Privacy Act. We are the data managers, yes. Think about things like when you ask, if you're working for a hotel and you ask employees to get vaccinated, do you have a right to that information? So how do you protect the employee from, from how you are getting information that you don't really need, and how would you practice it? The second one is think about your OSHA rules. People are working from home. So if they fall in the bathroom at home, is that a workplace? And does the insurance you have cover them when they have accidents at home? The third thing I'd like us to think about is a reputational risk that our decisions cause for our organizations. And it's your role. Sorry, is my network all over the place?
No, we are
It's
good.
your role to protect the reputation of your, okay? It's your role to protect the reputation of the organization you work for. And the last thing I'll close with is the first thing I started with. Think business. So you have a legal person in the business who worries about the law. Your role is to de-risk and as much as possible create risk mitigation so that your business is protected in the future. So use your business sense. That will be my parting shot. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And now, William.
Thank you, Susan. This is my parting shot. In my experience, most, if not all, litigation on employment matters arises because of mistakes that could have been avoided by HR managers or decision makers. We need to equip ourselves as people managers with the skills that we need to avoid having to litigate. The boss, the CEO who makes the decision to fire relies heavily on you, the HR professional, to give them the right advice. You need to be equipped to be able to give that right advice. Litigation is unpleasant, let me tell you. It is loss of money, loss of management time, it ruins relationships. If you can avoid it, please do. And how do you avoid it? 2 ways, in my view. Get it right. Get it right in terms of the employment contracts that you have, in terms of the templates, what they actually provide. Get it right with your policies. Get it right with your process, the process that you adopt.
Mhm.
And if it comes to termination, to the extent that there is a possibility of getting into a mutual separation agreement with an employee, no matter what they've done, even if they've slapped the CEO, please consider that possibility seriously. I always recommend, after the end of the disciplinary process, if the outcome is to summarily dismiss or terminate, please don't jump into that without first giving the employee that option of a mutual separation. The mutual separation has two advantages on both sides. The first one to the employer is that it would normally contain what is called a release and discharge clause, which would protect you against any future claims that this employee might raise, assuming that, of course, you have paid all the legal and contractual entitlements to the employee. On the part of the employee, the attractiveness of a mutual separation is that it protects their CV and enhances their chances of moving on with their life, getting employed with by someone else. And it also contains what we call a non-disparagement clause, which in a sense guards the parties against bad-mouthing each other and spreading harmful information concerning the other. Those benefits, in my view, outweigh any benefit you may ever get from the court. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, William, and the panelists. Thank you, William, Catherine, Odhiambo, and Rose. And on behalf of the business school, thank you for just bringing life to this topic of the legal framework, navigating the new labor hurdles, both HR compliance and HR recontracting. And to the participants, it looks like we have some work cut out for us to go back and relook at our contracts and start engaging in that contracting. And if the contract is in place, relook at the policies as well. So thank you very much. And we have come to the end of this session.